told your friend you're not okay.
Armies, get ready. Because what happened in the practice room before Taehyung sang Love Me Again at Jin's concert wasn't just another rehearsal. It was a moment of artist rebirth, a moment when Taehyung realized that 2 years hadn't diminished his abilities, but had instead built a much stronger version of himself. In a dim, quiet practice studio, Taehyung sat cross-legged on the polished wooden floor. No spotlights, no crowd, just himself and the gentle clink of equipment set up by the staff. The air was soft, with occasional footsteps and small conversations from the technical team, but Taehyung remained silent, closing his eyes, calming his breathing, and allowing his thoughts to reconnect with the stage he'd long since left behind. 2 years without a microphone in hand, and now he was at a different starting point, but a more mature one. He wore a black sleeveless shirt, revealing the changes in his arms, toned, stronger, like someone forged by long discipline. One hand tidied the cable of his in-ear monitors, while his shoulders moved slowly, breaking the tension. As he held the microphone, his expression changed slowly. There was a brief pause, as if his body remembered the feeling of the cold metal he'd held every day before military service separated him from the stage. Then he said softly, almost as if speaking to himself, 2 years, the first time holding a mic and in-ears again. His tone wasn't sad, but filled with the honesty that can only emerge after a long journey. The staff exchanged small smiles. They knew this was a big moment for Taehyung. He stood slowly, tapped his red in-ears, and then made a small gesture to the audio team. Could you lower the background on verse 2? And please raise the mids a bit. I want the vocals to stand out more clearly. His voice was soft, but firm. There was no hesitation in his instructions. Despite being out of the stage for 2 years, his sensitive ear for frequencies was still as accurate as ever, maybe even more so. As the music played back, Taehyung leaned in slightly, listening to the nuances of the new sound. His head tilted slightly, his eyes half closed, trying to sense whether the sound matched the emotion he was trying to convey. Yeah, a little more, okay, this is more fitting, he said. And then, in a moment that instantly stunned the room, Taehyung lifted the microphone to his lips and let out a soft note. It wasn't loud, not powerful, but flowed with his signature warm baritone. The staff glanced at each other, as if all silently agreeing, Taehyung's voice hadn't diminished in the slightest. In fact, there was something deeper. When he began singing Love Me Again, the entire atmosphere shifted. The previously ordinary practice room suddenly felt like a private concert hall. His voice contained a new layer of emotion, a mix of longing, maturity, and the experience he'd accumulated over 2 years. Each descending note felt heavier, each ascending note sharper yet still gentle. He paused mid-song with a small laugh. It's strange, holding a mic again after 2 years, he said, shaking his head slightly. But it wasn't an awkward laugh, more like someone finally rediscovering a lost part of themselves. The next rerun sounded much more solid. Taehyung began to move to the rhythm, his steps in sync with the beat as if his body remembered exactly what it felt like to be on a big stage. Sometimes he'd close his eyes, letting his voice flow naturally without pressure, just following his feelings. Anyone watching him would sense how much he'd missed moments like this. In between rehearsals, he'd ask for small changes. The reverb isn't enough. Turn it down a bit. I need a drier low note. Oh, and please turn up the right in-ear. The harmonics need to be clear. Each request was so detailed, so personal, demonstrating how deeply he understood not just the song, but every vibration that made up his vocal identity. The staff followed his instructions one by one, and Taehyung tried again, and again, and again. Each time his voice emerged, its quality grew richer, more refined, and more mature. Some of the staff looked stunned. 2 years hadn't diminished Taehyung's abilities, in fact, they'd strengthened them. His voice had a honeyed sweetness yet still carried a melancholy nuance that sent shivers down anyone's spine. As he entered the chorus, his voice grew fuller, with a seamless blend of chest voice and falsetto that made the song feel like a story he'd relive. When he finished, he let out a short sigh and a small smile. It's just starting to feel like it, he said, wiping sweat from his temples. As Taehyung exited the practice studio, the cool scent of the night immediately touched his skin. The studio door closed softly behind him, leaving behind the faint vibrations of his final notes. But even as he walked away, the energy he left in the room lingered like an echo that refused to fade. The staff, still tidying up equipment, exchanged glances, discussing one thing in hushed tones: he's back, and his aura is different. Taehyung walked through the long hallway of the practice building, holding the microphone he hadn't yet put down. His hand gripped it tightly, as if he wasn't ready to let it go after 2 years. Each step was steady, yet filled with thoughts swirling through his mind. He didn't say anything, but the look in his eyes told him that this comeback meant more than just a rehearsal. Reaching the small break room, Taehyung looked down at the table for a moment, then carefully placed the mic down as if he were placing something fragile. He looked down at his hands, his fingers trembling slightly, not from fatigue, but from a surge of emotions he couldn't contain. "I thought I'd forgotten the feeling," he muttered softly, barely audible. "But it turns out my body still remembers everything." He reached for a water bottle, but before drinking it, he paused and took a deep breath. It was as if the sound he'd made in the studio was still playing in his head. Something had changed inside him, something invisible, but felt in his every movement. Soon, one of the senior staff members, a sound director who had worked with him for a long time, entered the room. He smiled slightly and said, "Tae, you know? 2 years isn't a short time. But if this is the result, I think you've actually become even better." His praise made Taehyung pause. There was a glimmer of emotion in his eyes, but he covered it with a shy smile. "Really?" he asked, his voice half joking, half doubtful. "I was afraid my voice would change." The staff member shook his head quickly. "Changed? Maybe. But not degraded. You gain something you can't gain from continuing to perform. You gain depth." The word depth made Taehyung pause for a moment. He didn't deny it. During those 2 years, he hadn't sung on stage, but he had lived, learned, grown, and made sense of time. All of that had unknowingly become a new layer in his voice. A layer no one could teach. Taehyung took a sip of his water, then said, "I'm just afraid I'll disappoint people." "Oh no," the staff member replied quickly. "What did I hear? People will be touched more than ever." Those words made Taehyung stare at the floor, swallowing a slowly rising feeling of emotion. Maybe it was true, maybe he really was at his best. After a few minutes, he got back up and walked to the sound room to do a final check with the technical team. As soon as he entered the room filled with monitors, sound waves, frequency graphs, and large audio equipment, Taehyung immediately seemed revived. His professional aura quickly emerged. His body leaned forward slightly, his eyes focused on the equalizer screen, as if he had returned to the comfort zone he so desperately missed. "Play the recording," he requested. As his own voice played from the studio speakers, he didn't just listen, he analyzed. With his head slightly tilted, he examined every detail: resonance, texture, breadth, balance between low, mid and high, and even how his breathing sounded in the transitions between notes. "Aha, this is the part that's not quite right," he said, pointing to the graph. "My low mid is too thick in this line. Tone it down a bit. I want the emotion to be lighter." The audio team was quick to respond and make corrections. They were used to the fact that Taehyung wasn't just a singer who wanted to sound good, he was a musician who understood technique, emotion, and the character of his voice like someone carving a statue, not just holding it. Once the revisions were complete, they played it back. Taehyung closed his eyes, listened, felt, then smiled. "That's it. That's what I was looking for." And in that moment, everyone in the room felt the same thing. Taehyung hadn't just returned to music, he'd returned with complete control over his art. When he emerged from the sound room, his steps were lighter. His shoulders were slightly lifted, his face more relaxed. He was like someone who had just found a lost version of himself, and was now fiercely guarding it. Unconsciously, he whispered to himself, "I'm ready for that stage. I'm ready to come back completely." At the end of the hallway, the mini stage lights used for rehearsals came back on. The golden yellow light reflected off the walls, reminding him of the thousands of army bomb lights waiting for him.